Welcome back, everybody, to the Triad of the Force podcast, a podcast from Puerto Ricans coming together to do deep dives into Star Wars and other nerd-related media. And today we have a wonderful episode. We're going to be talking about not just Star Wars Outlaws, Low Red Moon, but we're going to have the New York Times best-selling author of adult novels that cross genres and audiences, as well as stories for Star Wars, Marvel, Star Trek, and Critical Role, the author of not just Brotherhood, but the book we're going to be talking about, Outlaws, Low Red Moon, Mr. Mike Chen. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I'm very, very, very excited to talk to you. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about coming into this book and how, it was, since it's kind of an Underworld book, it's not usually the type of Star Wars book that I seek out when I'm going to, commit to reading a book. So it wasn't on my radar at first, but the link was sent for the ARC, and you say, okay, let's give it a shot. And I'm so glad that I did, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had thoroughly enjoyed Brotherhood that you wrote a couple years ago, and I think they make a great duology. We'll talk about that a little later as we dive into everything. But before we kind of start with Star Wars and Low Red Moon and a little bit of Brotherhood, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what was your journey, right, towards becoming a professional writer?
So, I think I was a Star Wars fan first before I was a writer. I grew up. I was born in the late '70s, so I was born like right into the original trilogy. And I often tell the tale of how there are Christmas photos from when I'm like 3 or 4 years old of me and my brother, mostly getting my older brother, getting his Empire Strikes Back toys. But I played with them too, and I have very, very vivid memories of three different toys from that period. One is the Tauntaun, like the vinyl Tauntaun with the slit in it that you could stuff the figures in.
Yeah.
I didn't understand it at the time, but I do now. The Snowspeeder toy where the cannons they're supposed to light up, and ours never lit up, and the cannons just fell off. And then the ion cannon where you pressed a button and it just popped off. And so I saw Return of the Jedi in the theater. And it's been part of my life. I mean, we were talking about the Thrawn trilogy before this.
Yeah.
I was at Walden Books in the Bay Area, like buying the original hard copies. I asked my dad to pick up X-Wing for the PC on his way home from work, which he did, even though he had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
So, props to my dad. We rented a Super Nintendo to play Super Star Wars.
Wow.
Which, I mean, that's like expensive to rent a Super Nintendo from Blockbuster at the time.
At the time, yep.
Yeah, and so it's always been part of my life. As a writer, I started writing. I started doing a lot of my own like comic strips. That's how I started. I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old, and I would draw these comic strips, these stories that often took place like the almost like it would a lot of like my favorite science fiction. I did a lot of comic strips based on Robotech, which is the '80s anime series. But what I would do is I would like kind of write scenes in like the mess hall in between battles, or like friends just hanging out, like before the catastrophe or after the major battle. And so when I started actually selling books to publishers, and I was talking about, I was doing these media interviews, and they're talking about like how oh, you write these slice of life stories in science fiction, and it really kind of connected to me. Like, wait a minute, I've been doing that my whole life. Like, my brain has always gravitated towards finding like those quiet character moments in between the bigger things. So that's kind of how I got here. I was a sports journalist after I graduated college. I mean, I was an engineer, but I did sports journalism on the side. And then around 2011 or 2012, I decided I wanted to get back into creative writing. I took creative writing in college, and my teacher encouraged me to keep going. and we are still actually in touch. She is an executive at Simon and Schuster.
Hmm.
Um, so when I got my agent and when I got my first publishing deal, like I sent it to her, and it was just like weird thinking about like this, this college student that she, taught about like, show don't tell, like those types of
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
Like I'm just sending her copy after copy of each of my books.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my writing journey. And into Star Wars, my first Star Wars story was from a certain point of view, The
Hmm.
Empire Strikes Back. I wrote the Palpatine story where Palpatine discovers the identity of Luke Skywalker before he talks to Vader, and it kind of inverts the context of that scene. And I can't believe they let some random debut author
Hmm.
define such an important moment in canon.
How did that come about? Like, how did your like experience writing other things kind of led into from a certain point of view? Because obviously that opened the door not just for
Yeah,
writing that story, but now Brotherhood and Low Red Moon, and hopefully many more.
hopefully more. Yes. um, There was so when I first signed with my agent, I signed with him in 2015. His name is Eric Smith, and Eric asked me, okay, he signed me for my time travel story here and now and then, but then he was like, "What else do you want to do?" And I said, like, I want to write Star Wars. I want to write prequel
Hmm.
Star Wars, like pie in the sky, like that. That is my dream. And so as he got to know the team at like it was Del Rey, now it's Random House Worlds, he would bring me up. And I also became friends with Delilah Dawson and
Hmm.
Chuck Wendig and Rebecca Roanhorse. And I didn't realize it at the time, but they were vouching for me to the Random House editors.
Good
Um,
friends to have, that's for sure,
yeah,
and
and
amazing writers.
I think I grew a reputation as someone who could write really character-driven
Hmm.
science fiction. And I really wanted to write the prequel era stuff. And so um, basically had a lot of forces, no pun intended, um, putting me in front of the Del Rey team with the acknowledgement that I really, really wanted to do prequel stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I think I don't necessarily encourage people trying this at home. I don't even know it'd be really hard to do it in our fragmented social media
Hmm.
society right now. But one thing I did, so this was like mid or late 2018. This was running up to my debut, which came out in January 2019. And I had decided that like maybe one of the ways that I could show like my depth of knowledge of the prequel era, but also my ability to like crank out story pitches was from a certain point of view, A New Hope had come out. This
Hmm.
is before the one for Empire was even they even started working on it. And I thought like I'm going to put together a Twitter thread back when Twitter was okay to use.
Yeah.
um, it was about like I think it was 32 pitches of the
Mm.
Phantom Menace in chronological order,
Yeah.
and it was like just all this random stuff. Like I remember one of them specifically was like we would find out why Co Bibble thinks every communications jam transmission is leads to invasion. Like what is his
Yeah.
trauma
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
creates
Yeah.
that? So it was just like this list of it, and there was I remember talking with Rebecca and Delilah about like when do I unroll this, and they're like, well, wait for the right moment, and then there was the moment on Twitter when for you Marvel fans is when Simu Liu was announced as
Hmm.
Shang-Chi.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he had previously tweeted about wanting to like really, really, really wanting to be Shang-Chi. And it was kind of like this meme going around at the time of shoot your shot. It was
Yeah.
hashtag shoot your shot. And I don't remember if it was Rebecca or Delilah who texted me, but they're like, this is your time to do it. Like, this is the time when everyone's doing it. And I just started like unrolling this thread. And I got boosts from Star Wars authors that I knew. And I saw that like the people liking them were people from the editorial team. And so I was like,
Hmm.
okay, between all of this, like they know I exist, they know that I can do it. And I think there's one of the things about the authors that they hire everyone's really nice,
Hmm.
and everyone is really amenable to like revisions, deadlines, things like that. And like that's really, really important. And that's
Yeah.
something that gets discussed behind the scenes. I think when they're vetting authors, and the Del Rey team, or the Random House Worlds team, now like they'll talk to the agents and they'll be like, can this author work with an extreme schedule with a lot of different people providing feedback? And that's actually something that I can do really, really well. And so like and be nice about
Right.
it. It's like
Right.
it's really, really important not to be a dick. So it's kind of having all of that kind of cluster together, and that was the opportunity for Empire Strikes Back story, and that was my like, I'm gonna go big or go home type of
Hmm.
thing. Like if this is the only thing I get to do, I'm going to make sure it counts. And then it turned into other stuff. So that is my very long answer to your first question.
No, no, but an excellent, excellent answer. I mean, it's so inspiring, right? Because you always want to have like friends that are vouching for you and
Yeah.
people on your side. So it's very it's very inspiring to hear that, because that's what we want. We want people that are passionate and that they that they have a journey and that they fulfill it. So congratulations, because Star Wars is definitely a better place with you writing for it, because we've gotten like a couple of bangers out of you. So we're excited to keep breeding more. But in terms of the process,
Hmm.
one thing that I'm curious about, like how you write, right? Because hopefully this applies to all the different things you write, not just your Star Wars stories. But
Yeah.
like, what does that process look like? Do you have to sit anywhere? Do you have a playlist that you start creating for
No,
when you're
I
listening to? I mean, starting to write the books.
I need absolute silence, which which is why like I can't be around my daughter at the time because she and her Nintendo Switch are very loud.
Yeah.
Um, no, I need silence. I need to be able to think through things. Sometimes I will put music on to music specifically that like it's a beat and a vibe,
Hmm.
before I start a scene. Like if I'm not connecting with a scene, I'll try to find a song that I feel like this is spooky or this is intense or this is melancholy.
Hmm.
But it doesn't necessarily translate to like an actual character. For Brotherhood, I actually put on like the Kevin Kiner Clone Wars soundtracks.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, because you got to get into the Clone Wars mentality. Um, so my process is I always was an outliner, but Star Wars turned me into like a mega outliner, and I feel like doing Star Wars has allowed me to basically chop my like drafting time probably at least in half, if not further.
Mhm.
Like it used to be like I could do a manuscript in like a year, and now I think I can very comfortably do one in 6 months. I can
Wow.
do Star Wars manuscripts in 3 months if I need to.
Well,
The way that it works with Star Wars is they give you about 6 to 8 weeks to build this massive outline. And I know like different people have different sizes of them. Like my Star Wars outlines have been about like 10 to 12,000 words. I believe for oh, I can't remember who it is. Someone with one of the recent releases had like a 20,000 word outline, and I think like Delilah's are about like 5 to 7,000 words. So
mhm.
what I do when I'm writing the outline, it starts off around 5 or 7,000 words, and then it grows as I start to get more feedback from the editorial team, from the story group. And as I'm doing the outline, I'm actually going to like if my brain hears dialogue, then I'm going to write the dialogue in there.
Mhm.
Like I will put Obi-Wan's speech in Brotherhood where he's on trial and he's trying to like plead with the Nemoidian people to like listen to the facts and not give in to their emotions.
Mhm.
That was written mostly in the synopsis and then just like refined as I got into
Yeah.
the actual drafting. And so that became a part of my process for basically everything
Yeah.
moving forward. And so Delilah and I actually talked about that, how it's like we can't undo that part of our brain for
Mhm.
like writing like a little slower. And so I would not recommend like 3 months is still really, really difficult, but I will do
Mhm.
that for Star Wars. But I think like now I can comfortably do like 5 to 6 months, like 2 books a year, assuming like nothing catastrophic
Mm.
happens in my personal life or the outside world. Like I can I can do that, and it's because of like learning the skills of kind of visualizing
Mhm.
scenes and hearing dialogue, and just kind of getting it in there as I'm like basically writing a zero draft with the synopsis.
No, that's, I mean, that's impressive. And clearly it's a process that works because, as we mentioned, Brotherhood was such an enjoyable read. And now, we're going to talk about Outlaws. And that's
Mhm.
something that I think has been a particularly special kind of read. And we'll talk about it, more now in a second. So, yeah, so like I was saying, congratulations again for Outlaws, Low Red Moon, an amazing read. And welcome back to Star Wars. So, like, how did this book come about, right? Because as we were talking before, you were on the hunt more for prequel era stories, and that's where Brotherhood was set on with Anakin and Obi-Wan. So how did we shift from the Jedi Order and the prequel era to the lawless West outlaw era of the post Order 66 Underworld?
So, I did write in 2023 for the Return of the Jedi anthology. I did a story that was entitled Brotherhood. It's kind of an extension of the novel, which is where Anakin becomes one with the Force and Obi-Wan, guides him through it. So, that was really nice when Tom from Random House
Mhm.
Worlds emailed about that, and he's like, "You're kind of like the Anakin guy, so you should do the Anakin story." I'm like, "Okay, that's great." I'm extremely proud and humbled to be known as the Anakin guy. And so when my agent called, and I was at school pickup. I remember this very vividly because I don't get good cell signal at my daughter's
Oh
school.
no, that could be
Uh,
dangerous.
yeah, and so like he calls and he says like, "Oh, there's gonna be another Star Wars offer," and I was like, "Oh, cool." And like in my head, I'm immediately thinking like it's probably another Clone Wars type
Hmm.
of thing. And he's like, "This is May of 2024, so this is like Outlaws was just like trailers. It was like a
Yeah.
few months before it came out." And he goes, "You know that video game coming out, Outlaws?" I'm like, "Yes, I do. It looks amazing." And then he's like, "Yeah, they want to write a tie-in to it." And
Hmm.
he said that because I had just finished my Marvel one
Hmm.
with Moon Knight and Venom, and it was the same editor, Gabby Munoz, and Gabby, because Gabby was overseeing the project, they knew like they wanted it to be Jalen and ND. Are we talking spoilers at all?
Yes, yes, we
Okay,
are.
okay. So if you have played Outlaws, you know that Jalen and ND have like a really toxic relationship that involves like the murder of Jalen's entire family.
Hmm.
And so um, they wanted a story of how that happened. They knew ND would be like the character coming out of this
Hmm.
that everyone loved. Um, and so because a droid perspective for that much of a book um, hadn't been done to that level yet. And so Gabby looked at what I did with Venom in that book. And I gave Venom like a different point of view, like
Hmm.
tense. Venom was second person in that, second person present.
Hmm.
And Venom like had a similar arc where like the Venom in pop culture that we know is kind of like this like strange, snarky, like beastly thing. Like there's a lot of personality in
Hmm.
there, but for spoilers redacted reasons, Venom doesn't start out that way
Hmm.
in my book. Venom's kind of under the thumb of a greater threat. And so Gabby looked at how I took Venom's voice in that and made an arc about it, and that's how she wanted to kind of apply to ND5. Um, and it was funny because I was on contract at the time for three overlapping books. I was like just
Jeez.
finishing one, I was mapping one out, and then one was like further down the line.
Hmm.
And I was like, this sounds really, really cool, but I don't know if I can actually like squeeze this in because they wanted me to start writing in, I think, September. And so my agent let them know. and they were like, "What if we give you like a buffer of like 3 months?" And then my agent went back and talked with some of the other editors involved, and I think everyone kind of steps aside for Star Wars because they know like they know that selfishly it elevates an author's profile.
Hmm.
So like, and it's only they were only asking for a few months, so everyone kind of worked around it, which I really appreciate, and I was able to sneak it in there.
Interesting. So that means that if they came up to you right when the trailers were coming out, that
Mhm.
obviously the game wasn't out, so
Yeah.
you wouldn't have had a chance to play the game to
So what
understand the
happened?
voices. So like, what was that experience like to write it while the game is still unreleased?
So it was a there was like a series of meetings that happened across I think like July and early August, where first they gave me like a folder with like a lot of the design documents,
Hmm.
I guess I don't know who these pitches went to, if they were like internal or external or what, but it basically gave the main story for the game, and it had like slides for like the background of each of the major characters.
Hmm.
And they also gave me some scripts for cutscenes, and then also the ship dialogue between
Hmm.
ND and K, just so I can kind of get a sense of that. And then they did not give me early cutscenes, but they gave me an access code about a week before the game dropped. Um, and so
To play the game.
yeah, my research was just to spend 20 to 30 hours playing that game. And it's funny because it's like I knew the entire story. Like I going into it, like I was already completely spoiled. And so
Hmm.
from like the opening cutscene with Sliro, talking with all like the Underworld people, I'm like, I know what he's doing. So,
Yeah.
so from like every time I played it, I had my laptop open, um, and I would just like anything that was like, oh, this is a key world building point, or this is a something the character said that seems to be worth referencing. I would just jot down these notes. I did spend so many hours on Tatooine though, like
Hmm.
in photo mode. Like I would do jumps on my speeder bike,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like oh, you know, at night, and then angle it so she's like flying through the moon like ET, things
Yeah.
like that, and or like
A lot of wish fulfillment with that mode.
yeah, the Tatooine level is just, I mean, it's the most immersive and free that I think we've seen in Star Wars gaming. So I tell people like even if the idea of like playing as a smuggler, like if you're like just a pure Jedi person and you don't want to be a
Mhm.
smuggler, play Outlaws and get to Tatooine and then just pretend you're on vacation and
Yeah.
just like go everywhere in Tatooine. It's so cool. But yeah, that's how it came about. And then while I was playing the game, I was putting together the outline in
Mhm.
parallel. And then I think I did not beat the game yet when I started drafting. But I already knew what was going to happen. So I did beat it while I was drafting, so I got
Mhm.
to see all of those cutscenes up close.
That's awesome. And I imagine that then there was a process, right, where you're first seeing all the development, right, all the images and all the descriptions of everything before you play the game.
Yeah.
So you're already kind of figuring out all of the voices of these characters, but then you play the game and you actually start hearing not just how they sound, but how they act. So, like, what
Yeah.
was that process, right, between how you conceptualize how they would be to then seeing how they were in the game to then how you would eventually end up writing them?
So one of my strengths as a writer, and I think this is why I can do IP really fast, is I'm very good at adapting voice. And one of the cheats that I do when I write my standalone stuff is I will cast an actor into one of
Mhm.
my roles. Usually like borrowing from one of their roles where I really felt like that personality feels right. And so that way I can like see their facial expressions, I can hear their like vocal tics and things like that, and I can write to that. So when
Mhm.
I'm playing with IP, it's that's already built in there. So when they were telling me about Jalen and ND5 and Sliro too, um, like I got a sense of them, but it wasn't until like the first cutscenes where I hear ND's voice. I'm like, okay, he is not K2, he's not
Mhm.
HK47, he's definitely different. And for people who are listening to this and aren't aware, the audiobook is narrated by Jay Rincon, who is in D5, and Eric Johnson, who is Jalen. And because we have alternating points of view in the chapters, they process Jay's voice to sound like ND5 in his
Amazing.
dialogue. It's so listening to the audiobook feels like a DLC from the game. It's so cool. So and it's weird. I've never had like this weird, almost um like cycle or like a circle of like, I am inspired by the game, so I'm writing the game characters, and then the game actors
Yeah,
perform what
yeah.
I write, in character. I've never had anything happen like that
Yeah,
before, and
it's kind
that's
of like an
really, really
Ouroboros
cool.
almost. It's just like
Yes,
the process
exactly.
starts and then it continues, and then you're inspired by that, and then that kind of feeds onto itself. So it's definitely a lot of fun and very satisfying to see how it's culminated. Well, not culminated, but has this moment right where all the characters have, all the actors have come to replay those parts for the book. But there's lots of other characters
Hmm.
in this book, and one of the things that was a lot of fun as you're reading the book is discovering all these characters that show up and all the nods
Hmm.
that happen to other things. And to just name a few, right, we have
Yeah.
a name drop for Niamos. Fennec
Hmm.
Shand comes in to play a sizable role in the book. You mentioned Black Sun and Shizor,
Shizor's there.
obviously,
Yes.
which for those Shadows of the Empire
Shadows of the Empire.
N64 people like myself, that was so satisfying to read. We have Java, obviously, Crimson Dawn, Qi'ra. So this book brought all of these
Yeah.
places and characters and organizations from all across the Star Wars mythos right into this one book in a very organic way. It didn't feel like it was, it was like it was like ham-fisted in there. Everything felt like it should have been there. So what was
Hmm.
that process of choosing which things, right? And characters were going to show up, and how did you decide to incorporate them in the story?
It was a lot of fun, and it was different from like with Brotherhood. Like I knew I wanted to pull in Clone Wars stuff, but also the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars, and
Hmm.
also like any references that I can make to like Knights of the Old Republic. Um, all that's like very much like Jedi lineage.
Hmm.
This is Underworld. This is completely different, and this
Hmm.
is the time periods involved are not explored that much. Like so, like you have like the first year after Order 66, and then there's a time jump to like maybe about I, it's not clearly defined, but in my
Hmm.
head, like 6 to 12 months before Solo. So there's not a lot of material in there, but you know who the players are.
Yeah.
And so like with Fennec Shand, since we're going full spoiler here,
Hmm.
she was the first person I requested. I'm like, can I
Amazing.
use her? I mean, it's me not when,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
she's a legend. And I hope someday, like at a con, I can get her to sign a copy of this.
We're gonna
Um,
manifest that it's gonna happen.
yeah. And so I requested her, and because I knew like she's in Bad Batch.
Hmm.
There's some other material where she's around, and then so it's like, what is her arc from Bad Batch um to the Mandalorian? And so I'm like, well, she's clearly like everyone's terrified of her in the
Hmm.
Mandalorian, so like she's got a long time to kind of develop this reputation, and so their only real note about Fennec after it got approved um, was to she had to be like on the ascent in her
Hmm.
career. Like she could not be like the Fennec Shand
Right.
yet. She had to be like the hot property that people are like, oh, she's starting to raise her prices. Okay, we better
Yeah.
get in on this.
Hmm.
Um, and so, but her personality is pretty much the same. She's stoic. She will get the job done. She doesn't want to,
Confident. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, she doesn't want to like get involved in shenanigans or anything like that. And that was really fun to write. Like she's got this very like dry professionalism while like everything around her is like chaotic and kind of stupid, but
Yeah.
she's just kind of like, do you want me to shoot him or not?
Yeah. No
So that was
nonsense,
really
straight to
cool.
business. Yeah.
Um, Prince, the shout out to Prince Shizor.
Ah,
Um,
thank you.
so I had actually, so I had consumed all of the ancillary Shadows of the Empire stuff, but I did
Hmm.
not have an N64 as a teen. I had played the Hoth level
Hmm.
all of my
Legendary.
knowledge of the actual game of Shadows of the Empire is the Hoth level, which I like. I remember this is amazing, and so like I have a Steam Deck and I installed an N64 emulator. I'm like, I am
Mm-hmm.
finally playing Shadows of the Empire. This is like a year ago or something. And I'm like, wow, this is technically one of the worst games I've ever played.
No.
Like the Hoth level is still
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
It really is. But like the movement in the camera
It's
of
not
Dash
great.
Randall,
Yes.
yeah, it's like I love the story in it. The story
Yeah.
in it is great, and like I knew all of the other parts of the story from the book,
Hmm.
um, so I knew exactly what was happening. But I'm like, why is Dash Rendar like trying to jump over like this tiny little ledge and he
Yeah.
can't do it?
And he just like floats away like to the side. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not great, but
yeah.
for the 90s.
For the 90s,
eh.
like I see what they were trying to do. And like there's actually this really good documentary on Shadows of the Empire, like the game on
Hmm.
YouTube. And they're talking to it's John Knowles, I believe. Like you always have to there's John Knoll and the ILM guy, and then I believe it's John Knowles, the
Uh-huh.
LucasArts guy. But he was talking about how like halfway through production, like they knew that like they were trying to push into like actual 3D polygon stuff and they
Hmm.
knew that they couldn't do it. And so they were just kind of hoping that like like they put all of their efforts into the Hoth level, and the Hoth
Yeah.
level is what everyone remembers, but like the actual like levels of like when you're walking Dash Rendar, they're like, yeah, we knew, but like they had a deadline, so they had to do it.
S-
But I really wanted to get Black Sun and Chizor in there because like you got to shout out to the original Underworld,
mhm.
like piece of media. Like it was a huge thing, like that sort of like cross media story.
Yeah.
And so there's just a tiny mention of Chizor in there. Qi'ra made sense
Hmm.
because Kira's in Outlaws, and I wanted to kind of like overlap with that. And so we were deciding like, do we want before Solo or after Solo? Qi'ra
Hmm.
was approved pretty quickly, but the context of her, like we had to talk about it. And so that's why like there's one very like intentional mention of Dryden Voss
Hmm.
that shows you that like this is right before Solo.
Hmm.
It's after Crimson Climb, E.K. Johnston's novel. And there are references to some of the incidents in Crimson Climb.
Hmm.
And I talked with E.K. Johnston, just like I did with Brotherhood. Like we coordinated on like Anakin and Padme, but like on here, like we coordinated about Qi'ra. So she had some suggestions of like you should maybe reference like these parts.
Hmm.
She gave me like an early PDF of the book. And I said, like, do you want to pick out Kira's clothing for her scene? And so what Kira's wearing, like it's all picked out by E.K. Johnston.
That's awesome. That's awesome to see like how collaborative, all these Lucasfilm, not just the production, but the books are, like,
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying that like we all like each other,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
think a big part of it is like the editorial team. In order to meet these insane deadlines, you have to have someone who is nice
yeah.
because there's going to be a lot asked of them. And so they pick good people, and we all love Star Wars, and we all want to support each other and bring something into the sandbox and then take something from the sandbox. And so it's really fun to be collaborative. And we were joking, E.K. Johnston and I were like, we're still shooting for like our pie in the sky, like our dream project. Someone out there needs to greenlight this. Is a dual Anakin and Padme like book where she writes Padme, I write Anakin.
I mean, it's not with. I think there's a possibility, especially after was it a New York Comic Con? One of the Comic Cons last year, they announced the romance novel that's gonna come out, and
Yeah,
I don't know if it's this year, but I mean, if that's coming out, there's no reason why you can't do a
yeah.
romance novel
We
with the
we have
couple.
pitches for it. Like we've discussed this. It's just someone has to ask us to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
But speaking of couples, right? Anakin and Padme have their own dysfunctions, but
yeah.
here we have like our lovely dysfunctional duo of Jalen and ND5, and I wanted to
hmm
ask you a little bit about ND5 because Star Wars is no stranger to iconic droids, right? We
hmm
have R2D2, C3PO back in the classic days, and now we have BB-8 and K2SO.
hmm
So, what was that process, right? To join, to know that you have to join the ranks of such iconic droids and create ND5, because I think one of the, at least to me, one of the joys of reading him was his stoic and logic, and
Hmm.
how he, during that scene, right, when he attacks the Barsha compound and just
Yeah.
lays waste to everybody. I thought it was both terrifying and hilarious how
That
methodical,
was
as a
the
matter of fact,
goal.
he is.
Yeah.
So what was that process, right, to create him? Because I think it
There
was
was
extremely effective.
there were a few elements to it. There was a lot of kind of terrifying pressure because like Gabby and Tom were saying like this is kind of like the template for like droids moving forward. If we have another droid like perspective, like this is kind of establishing a lot of things about like
Hmm.
how do they process information? How is that presented, internally and externally? Like the decision I had pitched, making Jalen third person,
Hmm.
making ND
Yeah, I was
first
going to ask
person.
about that. Yep.
And the idea was because ND is in some places, like especially starting out when he's like literally just fresh off the Clone Wars,
Hmm.
that like he's just kind of like processing information and like making decisions and kind of like a workflow and priority type of thing. And how do you present that to the reader in a way that doesn't feel dry or
Hmm.
boring? And so to get in his head and then allow some of that in there, and then gradually build it out where you can see his self-awareness starting
Hmm.
to grow. And like the key point of all that is, we talked about how do droids grow? And the point that everyone kept going back to is the longer they go without a memory wipe, the more
Hmm.
they can grow.
Yeah.
And then also, they don't necessarily feel good, but they feel purpose, and that's kind of like the analog for it. If they feel like they're fulfilling their purpose,
Hmm.
then they feel like the equivalent of humans feeling good. And so, using those two items and having ND have his purpose changed several times, and
Hmm.
in like the after the compound attack, then some of his purpose gets inhibited,
Hmm.
both intentionally and unintentionally. And so he's got kind of like this sense of unfulfillment, but he doesn't know why. And so, but he doesn't have a memory wipe. And so he's able to grow, but and start to identify this more. And you see that poor guy just like
Hmm.
asking like, "Hey,
Yeah.
maybe I can, maybe I can be a real boy," like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
thing. And so their relationship, it was really, really important to actually, it was Alex from Star Wars explained. He had the best analogy, and I didn't think of this until he said it to me. He said, it's kind of like Han and Chewie in Solo, but like really toxic. And I'm like, yes, it
Yeah, that's
is.
a good point. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because they start off, as kind of like terrifying, and in conflict with each other, and then they become partners, and then then they start to grow. And it's interesting. I heard a review from another podcast where they had not played Outlaws and they
Hmm.
didn't really know who the characters were, and so they were cheering for them the whole time.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I was
and
one
I'm
of them.
like,
Yep.
oh, you haven't played
No,
Outlaws?
I had not played Outlaws. I came in
Oh, okay.
fresh, and I tried not to
Wow.
read
Okay.
too much about the game because I'm like, okay, I
Yeah.
don't want to really
It's two
know.
completely different experiences. Like people who've played the game,
Oh
they're
yeah,
like, I love him even more. And then people who haven't played the game, they're like, oh no, don't go there. Don't go there. Oh no.
it was. We'll get to it, but
Yeah.
yes, it was a gut punch not knowing how they end up in the video game. So which definitely. I mean, it's different perspective because you can still enjoy the book while knowing the end because you get to see how it unfolds, but not knowing how it unfolds, it definitely is a brutal
Yeah.
journey because you're
I,
rooting for friends to be friends and forgive each other and
you
have a
know,
good relationship.
one of my guiding lights for that actually was Qi'ra on
Hmm.
Solo. Like if you reframed Solo purely from Kira's perspective, it would kind of play out like Jalen on
Yeah, that's
this.
a good point.
And so I don't think anyone walks out of Solo going, I hate Qi'ra. I think they walk out of Solo going like, I understand Qi'ra, and those are some tough decisions, and I feel
Yeah.
bad for Han, but I get it.
Yeah.
And so that was my main sort of guiding light for how to write Jalen.
Yeah. Going back real quick though to ND5, we were mentioning how you wrote him in first person, which
Mm.
I thought was very successful. I've read other books, right, where they're written in the first person. Sometimes it's a little jarring.
Mhm.
How the process of reading that the books in that way. But I think it here is very successful. And one of the things that I think also helped frame it in a very interesting way that I really appreciated
Mhm.
was starting the chapters with the boot up system or
Oh, the system. Yeah.
the system startup. And it's something that reminded me, I love movies besides Star Wars.
Mhm.
And it really reminded me of the Terminator, when you
Yeah.
start like Terminator 1 and Terminator Judgment Day, when you kind of see the T-800 start booting
Mhm.
up and you see the red screen and all the letters
Have you
start to
seen
show up.
Have you seen the original RoboCop?
Of course. Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
same thing. Like where it's like he's listing like the prime directives and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So that was very early on. I pitched that, and I want to use it um, every time ND had like a time jump or like basically like was charged and like turned off and turned back on basically. So it's like it's a very convenient scene setting like exposition.
Hmm.
So like because there's a line in there like one of his startup criteria is like environmental analysis. Where the hell am I?
Hmm.
You know, restraining bolt on or off. And so it's just like conveying like this key information, but in a format that reminds you like, yeah, he's still a droid. Um, and so that was very much I was thinking RoboCop, but like definitely
Hmm.
like Terminator also. I will say with Terminator, so the compound
Exactly,
sequence,
exactly.
um, I mean, like I'm thinking Terminator 1 when he goes into was it Tech Noir, the bar,
Hmm.
and he's just like taking people out. Um, but the so we talked about like how graphic do we make this?
Hmm.
And because it's pretty brutal for a
Yes,
Star Wars
that
book.
seems intense.
And so the idea was like there was two things. Like it had to be terrifying, but it had to be clinical too,
Hmm.
because Indy is just fulfilling these directives. So he doesn't feel bad. He doesn't feel angry. Um, he's just like doing his job. And he's also like, so there's a moment where, like, it describes how he hides some of the bodies. And in my head, I'm thinking of Assassin's Creed or Metal
Yeah.
Gear Solid. I love stealth games. But like, there's in those games, like you're stuffing people into like carts of hay or lockers or things like that. And in this, I'm like, let's see if we can go a little more body horror. So like he's like breaking shoulders at the joint to
Yes.
stuff them into places. And I'm like, we can pull back on this. And so the idea, like we talked about it, and we're like, we've got to see like the first one or two assassinations like through ND's eyes. The rest of it we can kind of exposition.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's kind of more horror in Jalen finding the bodies in like
Yes, yes,
mutilated
yes.
fashion. One of the things I pitched right away, because I could just see it in my head, was when Jalen and the garden droid are like watching the thermal signatures on the
Hmm.
screen, and then they just start disappearing, and they're
Yeah.
like, "What the hell's happening?" Because I think there's like a lot of terror in like the something is clearly wrong, but we have no
Idea
idea
what it is.
what it
Yeah.
is. So I didn't want to, I didn't write too much extra that had to be cut from that. We just kind of decided like, let's hold the limit here for like in the moment violence, and let's let the rest of it kind of be unseen. And that way, when you get to the actual moment with ND locking everyone in a room and just starting to gun people down because they're being dumb.
Hmm.
I think it's more powerful. You're not as desensitized to it yet. But I was like, I have some friends who are thriller writers, and I thank them in the acknowledgments for this. My friends Wendy and Diana, because they write murder scenes all the time, and I'm like, how do you guys write murder scenes and like not feel icky and terrible after that? And they're like, yeah, you just kind of get used
You
to
get used
it.
to it after a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta watch a lot of 80s horror movies to kind of
Yeah.
get
That
in that mindset.
that sort of stalking type of thing was like so Tom we were talking about the tone of this, and Tom actually said think of it as like Jason Bourne is coming for you and there's
Mhm.
no escape. And I'm like, okay, I can do that.
I mean, that's a good mentality because Jason Bourne definitely is someone that's not emotional about it. He's
Yeah,
very, as a matter of fact, and I think that uh, ND is kind of the same way in how clinical he is about it, which
yeah,
somehow kind of balances out the horror of the scene because he's so,
yeah.
as a matter of fact, about everything that's happening that it kind of makes everything somehow oddly funny,
Yeah,
if that
the
makes sense.
juxtapositions of things were they were really funny to me in my head, where it's just like these drunk rich people.
Yeah.
Gabby wrote something where it's like, Indy is getting stalled by a woo girl. I'm like, yeah, he is. Like, just there's a moment where like I think someone grabs like two drinks and just goes woo in front of him, and like eventually he has to kill her. There's I call him like the frat guy
Hmm.
cousin in
Oh, yeah, yeah,
where Indy just like he's the guy's just being a terrible person to him to ND, and then ND just like tosses him over the
yeah.
cliff. Um, and so it was important to show that ND does not recognize him as a terrible person, but ND sees him as like a wasteful person.
Hmm.
Um, and like the fastest way to get rid of that person is to just like throw him. And so, but one of the editorial team said like, "This made me laugh. Does this make me a bad person?" And I'm like, "No, it doesn't make you a bad
No,
person.
it's a they
They're
it's a
the
different
Barshas are
kind.
terrible people."
Yeah, it's a different kind of hive of scum and villainy,
Yeah,
and we'll get to some of those similarities later because I think you do a lot of interesting things, right? With the how we talk about like these corporations in the underworld, but
yeah,
but before we get to that, I really want to talk about we're talking about body horror,
hmm,
and one piece of bodies like ND5 Scar, right?
yeah,
He has a physical manifestation of everything that happened during the assault on the compound, and when Jalen is taking him to get the restraining bolt and get fixed, like he has the option, right, to fix the scar, and he decides
yeah,
to keep it so that he's reminded of his
yeah,
traumatic past, and it in a lot of ways it just perpetuates right that trauma that
yeah.
he's dealing with, but then he perpetuates it on ND5. So I'm curious, like how does Jalen's relationship with ND represents his relationship with Zero and his own traumatic past.
Yeah, Jalen's like it was really important to start Jalen off as extremely sympathetic. And so the opening chapter when him and Sliro are children, and you identify right away that this family is not a good family. Like the parents are just exceedingly cruel to Sliro, and to Jalen, they're still cruel in like this sort of like cold,
Hmm.
like detached billionaire kind of way. And I wanted to show that Jalen could be on the trajectory to be like, the horrible, like ultra rich stereotype that we
Hmm.
see in our real world. But because he, as a child, he has enough empathy for his younger brother, and that empathy for his younger brother is what grounds him in a way that like he doesn't become as horrible as his parents.
Hmm.
But he's still like a victim of circumstance where like he's lived this opulent life, he doesn't know anything but that, so he's still like not going to be like the most humble or
Hmm.
I guess generous person, even though he tries to be. And I think like if
Hmm.
if this took like an alternate path where where he was given the opportunity to be more exposed to like humanitarian efforts or something like that, it would like bring him down into more of a philanthropist
Hmm.
type of billionaire. Um, but he's not. I mean, like so he's set up to fail by his parents right away, but he pulls out of it because he feels empathy for his brother. So um, starting with that and knowing that he's doing everything for his brother, and so when his brother he thinks disappears, it's like the emotional core that he holds on to, and
Hmm.
it develops this pattern in him where he needs to hold on to something. And so the scene where ND like um where he is giving ND the scar by like helping the droidsmith like open up the plating, and he's striking it because this is still this killing machine that just assassinated his entire family and took his entire life away from him. And that's got to be cathartic
Hmm.
somehow. So you have these kind of competing things where he's so traumatized in a need to like hold on to the past, like the one symbol of his, the one good thing that he felt about his family, to hold on to that, but then also to keep the scar to not forget. So
Hmm.
it's not healthy. I don't think any therapist would be like, you got to let it go. But
Hmm.
therapists don't seem to exist in Star
They
Wars.
don't. They don't. We know that. We know that Anakin would have, had a different path if we had
Yeah.
had mental health
If there
professionals.
was a if there was a Jedi counselor, that would have been great. But Jalen's relationship with ND is set to intentionally mirror his
Hmm.
relationship with Sliro, and you see that in the way that like he does like these personal logs that he makes ND record. That mirrors the way that he used to talk to Sliro. And so he sees ND as kind of like the stand-in, but like not really. Every time he feels himself like opening up
Hmm.
and letting himself become more of a partner, something happens and he pulls back and he says like,
Hmm.
no, not yet, no, not yet. And then when we get to a point where like he feels like, yes, I can do this, it actually works. And then we get like the big turn and reveal of
Yeah.
Sliro.
It's gut wrenching. But one of the interesting things was eh, that was fascinating about Jalen throughout the book was obviously we start seeing him in the beginning, how he's from a privileged upbringing, how he's going to succeed his parents as CEO
Mhm.
of Barsha Corps, and he's gonna be in this rich society and
Yeah.
doing business with rich people and that kind of life, which might appear to be the opposite life of the underworld and gangsters and everything that we associate right with that side of the tracks. But as Jalen's keeps being in the underworld and he kind of sees that all these skills of that he learned as he was training to be CEO is transferable
Yeah.
to the underworld in a lot of ways. And by the end of the book we kind of start seeing how maybe the underworld isn't that much different to all these corporate interests that are allegedly on the other side of the track. So especially like in the I don't know like how much we can get into like the real world influences, right? But I thought it was especially relevant with the times that we're living in when we're seeing
Yeah.
how like our corporations good just because they're legal and our criminals bad just because someone said they are. So can you talk a little bit about like
Yeah.
that process of Jalen realizing maybe that the underworld's not that different from Barsha Core?
There's two layers to that. There's like I guess like business money making layer, and then there's like the people layer. So like on the business side, it's I wanted to be really upfront about how these massive corporations, like, they don't care if it's empire or republic. They do not care. They see it literally the same
Hmm.
because it's still just kind of funneling into their profit margins. And they have these underhanded deals to like whatever the whatever the empire needs. They're like, sure, yeah, we can smuggle some spice inside our plates, no big deal, and it's
Hmm.
like, you know it's all transactional. It's not even, there's not really any sort of like morality, good or bad towards it. It's just transactional
Hmm. Hmm.
and profit, um which, it's not a stretch to say like exists in so many ways, and not just our current times, but has always existed
Hmm.
in like in the overlap between large corporations and governments.
Yeah.
And then on the people side, like, there's that sort of cluelessness that happens like when you can just buy everything. Like there was, I forget, I read this article about how it was talking about like theorizing that like, being rich is uh is an affliction in a way that like it changes the brain because you no longer have to deal with conflict,
Hmm. Hmm.
like everyday conflict. You've got money to just cover it, and it so your brain doesn't have to think through like that level of like weighing this or that, problem solving.
Mm.
Like you don't see impediments anymore. And when that happens and your brain becomes like recalibrated towards that, like your ability to assign proper weight on an emotional level changes too. It was a really fascinating article. Um, and again, I think like there's plenty of examples of that in the real world. And so I wanted to we don't really see oligarchs in
Mm.
Star Wars. It was
Mm.
really fun to be able to like kind of dive into this world where like they're talking to other like megacorps, they're talking to people in the Empire, but they all just feel like they float above it.
Mm.
Um, and to see that like to mirror that in the underworld where they don't float above it in the underworld. They just kind of like ride the tide. But it's
Mm.
like, you have like, and we see this in the games or in Outlaws where like the different factions will sometimes work with the Empire and sometimes they're
Mm.
stealing from the Empire. And we all know that. I mean, that's why Vader hires bounty hunters.
Mm.
That's where
Mm.
Shadows of the Empire comes in.
Right.
And so there's this epiphany that Jaylen has where like all the training where he's been taught to like to smooth talk people, to look for opportunities for things like that. It applies in the real world. It just looks different. It's not boardrooms, it's cantinas.
Mm.
Um, instead of like security guards, it's like the scuzzy person in the back of the corner with the blaster.
Mm.
The mentality is still there because it's still just about profit for most people in there.
Yeah, it's never, or usually not about people, right? It's
Yeah,
always about self-interest and not helping, the people that you're supposed to be in service of. And I think that that was particularly relevant, right? Because we're living in very charged times where we're kind of seeing like how lines are completely blurred. And that when
yes.
we're seeing it live, right? Before like all these books
I
and
would
movies
not,
were
I would
trying to
very
bring that
much
out.
not like to live in interesting times
Yes,
anymore.
I would like to be boring.
Yes.
Uh, Again, I don't know. I don't know when things were boring. Now, kind of because looking back, it's always with rose-colored glasses.
Yeah.
But sometime that was a little bit more boring.
Yeah.
Um,
You didn't have to wake up in horror every
every day,
day,
and
maybe like once a month.
2026 has been a doozy
Yeah.
so far. But another doozy is the Sliro's reveal. Right, we've
Mhm.
been going up the whole book with Jalen and Andy's search for Sliro. And I think for those who played the game, Sliro's reveal of selling out his family could have been like a predictable
Yeah.
twist. But how did you approach that as you were writing this to maintain that as a twist that would be an effective emotional moment?
So like the arc of the book was established in the synopsis, but we debated about like so in the first part of the book, you don't actually really hear Sliro's name with the ISB. He's called Regional Auditor 6.
Hmm.
That's how ND recognizes him. We had debated about actually naming him there or creating some sense of mystery about it. And it was like, if you know if you played the game, then like you probably know,
Hmm.
but ND doesn't know and Jalen doesn't know. So it could still like work through their eyes. And it's kind of like the same way Tom framed it as like are you watching the Phantom Menace first or are you watching A New Hope and then going back to the Phantom Menace? It's like,
Yeah.
do you know who Darth Sidious is or do you not know who Darth Sidious is? It's like it kind of like that. And it
Hmm.
works both ways. That's why like when you told me that you hadn't played the game, I'm like, "Oh, it's a very different experience
Yeah.
for you." Um so it was just kind of like writing it like in the moment, like knowing that you know, the we had to make it work for non-players because not everyone's going to do that. Some people just want to experience an underworld story, and so it had to work for them, but it had to be true to who the characters were in the
Hmm.
game. So we just decided to make um, give enough hints that like you probably tell. Actually, I'm curious. Like, did you think it was did you think it was Sliro?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
I did. I mean, obviously, I don't know. And as I was reading curiosity kind of got the best of me. I was like, oh, let me go to Wikipedia real quick to see like
Oh,
if any of this
okay.
stuff, what has happened. So it might have been spoiled halfway through. But I as when I started and like his big absence occurred, and he
Yeah.
was I forgot how he was referred to when he was working at the Empire at first. And I was like, okay, this seems like this is where we're going.
Yeah.
It's still, it's still effective, right? Because
Yeah. The emotions are still there.
it leads to so many
The I
more not moments, not of catharsis, but just of heartbreak,
the
right? For every
moments
character.
the emotions still had to be true. And
Hmm.
and so whether the reader knows the truth or not, I mean, it still had to feel like, okay, Jalen is getting these things the whole time. Actually, here's another analogy that I'll use. In Lost Stars, like we all know what's going to happen to Alderaan, but because Claudia Gray is putting it through the eyes of like, essentially like lower decks people,
Hmm.
like I had actually not read Lost Stars until like my holiday break, and like that was like going to be my gift to myself. And then I messaged Claudia, like I'm a slow reader, and I finished it in like 4 or 5 days. Like it's so good.
Wow. Yeah.
But the scenes when they're like on the Death Star and they're like talking about like why are we at Alderaan? What's going to happen to Alderaan? Wait, you're from Alderaan, and like I'm actually like I can feel my pulse like
Hmm.
racing,
Hmm.
and I'm like I know what's going to happen, but I don't know how it's going to affect these people. And so I think that works. It's a similar thing where if you already know, then you're still going to have that tension of like, oh no, oh
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
oh no. And then compared to like if you're going in fresh, you're like, wait a minute, is it this? Maybe it's this. Oh no, it's this.
Yeah. 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 And for me, it was really like a moment where once that, because you were saying at the beginning of the interview, right, that Jalen, you wrote him as someone that you want to start rooting for, right?
Yeah.
And as someone who hasn't played the video game, I didn't know what the relationship between ND5 and Jalen becomes. So the whole time that you're reading it, you're rooting for them. You're like, oh, well, this is a Star Wars story. There's gonna be a
Yeah.
happy
They're like a
ending.
buddy
Friends are gonna
comedy.
Yeah, friends are gonna become friends. They'll learn the error of their ways, and then
Hmm.
they, ride off into the sun, into the twin sunsets. But lo and behold, that is not. Spoiler alert for everybody. But obviously, this is a spoiler interview. But lo and
Yeah.
behold, that is not what happens. And the moment that occurs after Sliro's reveal is the catharsis that we were expecting of them, of Jalen maybe removing that restraining bolt
Yeah.
from ND5 and finally kind of accepting each other and seeing each other as partners and friends is undone. And he just goes against everything that we were building up towards, and their trust is just broken and
Yeah.
destroyed in the most heartbreaking way.
It
So,
was
like, how
really
did you develop this moment? Because I felt like my heart was just
I felt
broken.
so bad.
That restraining bolt, I can't see it the
Yeah.
same way again.
I basically like I try to when Jalen kind of commits internally, like when he realizes that that Sliro is the one who tried to kill him. So Sliro is behind the assassinations, and he commits internally, like my entire life is going to be about vengeance
Mhm.
right now. So I kind of I wanted to make his because his relationship with ND was always like 70% healthy and then like
Mhm.
30% like toxic, and you could see like the toxic parts like bubbling up, but then you would see them recede and they would make progress together.
Mhm.
And like I've certainly had friends who like something traumatic happens to them and they become toxic for
Mhm.
a period of time, and like they process it and then they come back and they apologized, and then we're friends again. Like that's a very natural thing in real life. And so I wanted to have Jalen just be like, it was really important that the moment right before, like when he tells Indy, like, I'm putting this back on you, he gives him like the flimsiest excuse
Mhm. Yep.
in the
Yep.
world. Like it's so like transparent, but Indy can't see that.
Yep.
It's like
Yeah.
Jalen took like the first opening he got and he took it. And it was just be like, how do toxic partners work? How do toxic friends or family like
Mhm.
pull you back in? Like, how do they sort of like frame themselves as the victim and use that for like a power grab. And so it was like, I hope no one ever goes through something like
No,
that.
no,
But
no.
and big picture, like if you've never experienced that, this will give you a model of what to look for. So hopefully it will help in like the real world.
Yeah, no. I mean, thank you, I guess, for breaking everyone's heart because that was brutal. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. So you you succeeded because you created two characters that we got emotionally invested in as the story progressed. So it was definitely the gut punch.
Hmm.
But that is not how the book ends. The book
Yes.
ends with an epilogue that I thought was a wonderful nod to the game, especially for those who have played it. And it shows ND5 with Kay and Nyx years after the event of the book. So
Hmm.
especially for people like me that haven't read that haven't played the game, excuse me. Like how is ND5 different at this point of his life, and how did you decide to end the book with this epilogue with
Uh,
the character, with Nyx and Kay?
so it was actually not in the original pitch. Um, we were in a meeting with the Ubisoft team and the story group and the editors, and I don't remember who actually said. Um, Someone in the meeting said something like, "God, I feel so bad from ND. Can we just like time jump where he's happy
Mhm.
with K?" And then I go like, "I can write that if you guys will let me." And it was just kind of like silence. And then I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna try it." And so I wrote that epilogue, and then I sent it in, and my editors liked it, and they're like, "We don't know. This is not part of the original pitch, so we don't know if you'll be able to keep it. Well, why don't we just see what
Mhm.
people think about it?" And when it was approved, um, so the original the original final scene in like kind of like that cantina basement
Mhm.
with ND and Jalen was originally a little bit more peppy. It was like it was violent, but it was more about like how they like they're like an effective duo.
Mhm.
Um, but because we had the sort of like uplifting epilogue, then we were like, okay, well, like then let's lean more into almost like the body horror of the
Mhm.
moment with the droid collar, because that mirrors a moment in the Outlaws, like the ending sequence.
Mhm.
Um, and so I kind of just like rewrote a little bit of it. Well, just more like all the actions were the same, but like the reframing of like how Jalen uses the droid collar and like how ND is processing like this loss of autonomy. So it went darker just because we knew on the next page you're going to see ND in a peaceful place. Um, and I think like it's just uh, one of the someone at Lucasfilm was used as a beta reader because they hadn't played the game,
Yeah.
and then they were like, "How do you feel about it?" And they're like, "I was so heartbroken," and then I read the epilogue, and I know that ND is happy. I'm like, "Yes, okay, that
Yes.
works." The book does not specify if it takes place during Outlaws or after Outlaws.
Mhm.
I didn't want to sort of cut off any possibility for further story. So like everything in there is really vague. You just know they're at a point in Outlaws where K and ND trust each other, and ND
Mhm.
has evolved to to like recognizing that K is not Jalen. K treats
Mhm.
ND with respect, and ND has a relationship with Nyx. One of my favorite parts playing the game is when you're just on the Trailblazer and you see ND walking around and he goes, "Hello, Nyx." I just
Mhm.
love that. It's so like just this tiny, tiny little moment. And so actually when I first got the audiobook files, the first thing I did was listen to the epilogue with Jay Rincon
Nice.
narrating it in character. And it's just like, oh, it makes me feel so good. And so it was just really important that like we've been through this. We see like sort of like the turn at the end. I guess it would almost be like if you if you watched the prequel trilogy and
Mhm.
then after Revenge of the Sith, you saw like the celebration on Endor with Anakin's ghost coming back. You don't know
Hmm.
how it got there or why or what happened, but you know that in the end, Anakin is, happy
Yeah,
and
yeah.
safe and come back. So it's kind of like that. Like I don't think it ruins anything about Outlaws. If you have come to this book clean or cold, and you've fallen in love with these characters, then you can play Outlaws or watch, like they have like 3 or 4 hour cuts of the
Hmm.
entire game and just watch it like a movie, and you will get the complete journey there, just like if you were going from the prequel trilogy to the original trilogy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like for us that didn't play the game, that epilogue definitely opens the book, no pun intended, to wanting to be, to wanting to see like how that journey continues in the video game, because there's definitely a lot more to explore as it's hinted there. But we've kind of reached the end a little bit of like our discussion of Outlaws Low Red Moon. But before we start wrapping up. I've been talking about in the beginning when we started talking. You're writing Brotherhood
Mhm.
originally before coming into Low Red Moon. So one thing that I'm curious about, right? Because both books are about, I mean, they're not buddy cop comedies, but it's about two people who are
Yeah,
very different, doing things together, and figuring it out as they go. So I,
yeah.
I wonder, like, if what how did Brotherhood influence Low Red Moon, if at all?
Um, Well, since this is a spoiler discussion, I brought Mill back, and that was really important to
Mhm.
me. It was after Fennec and Qi'ra were approved. I looked at the outline, and I was like, this person in the end who helps Jalen out, like she could fit that. And I knew, like we had already established in one of the comics that she survived Order
Mhm.
66. So I asked if I could do that, and then like it was like the most apologetic email because I was like, I know, like you can totally say no, it's totally fine. I just like I kind of want to do this for me. I know it's a little selfish, it was very much like that, but they let me do that. So um that aspect of it was really important to
Mhm.
me to be able to take the character that I created and I know has become really beloved to a lot of readers, and to show her that like she's getting on. It's a tough galaxy,
Mhm.
but she and her best friend Vivert are getting on. So that was one of the things. But you mentioned buddy cop. Like I mean, like it was definitely there was some of that in Brotherhood.
Mhm.
Um, and then in this, like it was very intentional, like the scene especially where like they're doing the stakeout
Mhm.
outside of Madel Nareth's house, and they're like in a car just waiting, and I wanted it to be like Lethal Weapon or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that, where it's
exactly.
just like it forces them to talk about stuff because they have nothing else to do, but they're doing like this stakeout together. So there is definitely elements of buddy comedy in there, and I think this is too, like this is the difference between writing Anakin and Obi-Wan that have like so many hours of material already established. With that, it's like trying to fill in like the point A to point B journeys.
Mhm.
Whereas this, like, there's only the game.
Mhm.
There's no other material, and the time period's pretty open too. So there's a lot of freedom with how do we get to play with these elements. And so I try to think about like what are some action tropes or spy tropes or buddy cop tropes that
Mhm. Mhm.
I would like to see in Star Wars, and then be able to use them because this is not the Clone Wars, this is not the Jedi Order. So I can have the stakeout or have Andy go into the DMV and like get
Oh yeah,
rebutted by
that was
like
hilarious. Yeah,
yeah.
yes.
So that is actually modeled on the DMV about 5 miles from my house.
Mhm.
But all of the California DMVs have that same sort of numbering system. And so
Mhm.
Jen Heddle at Lucasfilm, she put a note in there because there's the part like where it like calls the number overhead in like this really stilted voice, and then Jen's like, "I know what this is. Like I have been here." I'm like, yeah, that's the California DMV system.
That's amazing. I mean, that's when Star Wars kind of thrives, right? When you take what's familiar and then turn it
Yeah.
into something that's just a little bit off, so that then it just fits into the Star Wars mythos. Um, Mike, you've written now. stories for the Jedi. You've
Mhm.
written now stories for the Underworld. Uh, is there any other area now in Star Wars that you would like to explore?
God, anything. Let me write anything more. I would love to.
Perfect. That's a perfect answer.
That's basically it.
Um, before we wrap up,
Mhm.
or is there any other project now that you're working on that you're, obviously that you're able to share with us that you want to talk about before wrapping up?
So I have an original, more Star
Mm-hmm.
Trek inspired space opera called The Photonic Effect that comes out in April. My pitch for that is Star Trek Deep Space Nine meets Star Trek Voyager meets Mass Effect. So it is not Star Wars, doesn't feel like Star Wars at all. It's much more, I think, political and cerebral. That comes out in April. And then in August, I am part of the Critical Role anthology
Mm-hmm.
for the Mighty Nine. I got if you've watched the Critical Role campaigns or you watched the Mighty Nine TV series, then you know beloved shopkeeper Pumat Sol. I got to write a Pumat Sol story with him and his three simulacra. So that was a lot of fun to write. It's really goofy. Um, and then I have a YA novel that has not been retitled yet, coming out in September, so I can't really plug it yet.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I have a lot of projects
Busy,
coming out.
busy.
Busy, yeah. And well, so that's kind of why when I got offered this, I was like, where am I going to insert this in my schedule? And it was my YA editor and my space opera editor that were willing to accommodate it.
That's amazing, and we're definitely certainly glad that it was able to be accommodated because it's an excellent read, and I know that I've see all the reactions that I've seen online from the fandom has been extremely positive. So I'm very excited for. I mean, it comes out this week on February 3rd. So by the
Hmm.
time that we put this episode out, people will have hopefully started it, maybe finished it, so they can listen to this spoiler-filled interview. But before we wrap up, Mike, where can people find you?
I am mostly active on Blue Sky, Mike Chen Writer. Mike Chen Writer is basically my social handle. So also on Instagram. I am much more active on Blue Sky. Instagram, I warn people, it's mostly just photos of my dog. So if you like
We love
dog photos,
dogs.
I think we really need dog
Well,
photos
we
right
do.
now.
Well, we do.
So that's mostly it. But if you want to ask me questions about Star Wars or Star Trek or um, all the indie rock references inside
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
book, or I long for a time when I can just use social media for that and not have to be politically engaged. But I'm pretty politically engaged on Blue
and
Sky too.
and we have to nowadays because
Yeah.
being silent acquiescence in many ways. But
Yes.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Thank you for being flexible in times. I know that with time zones is very difficult. Congratulations again on Outlaws Low Red Moon. It's an excellent addition to the Star Wars canon, and we definitely enjoyed it here at Triad of the Force, and we loved talking with you. So thank you so much for
Thank
taking the
you.
time.
Thank you for reading it. Thank you for going into it unspoiled. And you're a really good case study of how it works as just like an underworld and ISB novel, which is like I've been asked that quite a bit about like, can I read this without the game? And it's like, well, if you
Yeah.
like Solo, if you liked Andor, like with the ISB stuff, I think you will
Yes,
like
yes,
this.
yes, absolutely. I was definitely getting all those Andor vibes. So
Hmm.
it was especially like in the afterglow of season two. It was always nice to be like, oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah,
We got
there's
a
more
little bit of that.
ISB.
Um, and always great. Um, so everyone listening, please make sure a book comes out February 3rd. So by the time this is published, the book will be out. So make sure to go get it at your local indie store. Get it on ebook or audiobook if you want to listen to the original performers reprise their roles as Jalen and ND5. I've heard it's an amazing ride. I haven't had the privilege of listening to the audiobook, but whichever way you read your books, make sure to get it in that way. But with that, thank you so much, everybody. We have been Triad of the Force. If you like what you've listened to, please make sure to share, like, and subscribe. But with that, thank you so much. Until the next one, and may the Force be with you.